On my 32nd birthday, my sister walked in with a cake that screamed in bold pink letters, "Biggest disappointment." Everyone laughed like it was the best joke of the night. I didn't. I smiled instead, the kind of smile you wear when you're bleeding inside. What they didn't know was that behind that smile, I was already gathering every stolen file, every forwarded email, every receipt they thought I'd never find. And when I dropped it all to Fortune, the world listened. 10 days later, my family, so loud, so cruel, fell into silence. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments or tell me where you're from? I love hearing how far my story reach. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now let me tell you everything. And if my story speaks to you, don't forget to subscribe. Your support means more than you think, because sometimes telling these stories feels like shouting into the dark. My name is Spencer Cole Grant, and this is the truth I've carried for far too long. On my 32nd birthday at Sage and Juniper in Sedona. The room looked like a magazine spread, exposed brick string lights the color of honey, cinnamon, and cedar braided into the air. I'd paid for the private room, the menu, and the cream roses because my mother likes tradition displayed like a centerpiece. I took my seat angled at the head of the table with Elaine Grant on my right and Harold Grant, my father, anchored at the far end, eyes already on his glass. Across from me sat my sister Marissa Grant, glowing with the kind of attention she doesn't have to earn. Derek Grant. My brother hovered next to the doorway with his phone lifted like a small obedient moon. Aunts and uncles made soft conversational weather. I kept my hands still on the linen and reminded my face how to be pleasant. When the server pushed in the cake, the room tilted a degree. Single-tier pink frosting, so bright it leaned toward fluorescent in white block letters, centered like a thesis. Happy birthday to the family's biggest disappointment. A beat hung in the air. Then the laughter detonated. Derek slapped the table. Marissa sang out. Just a joke. Spence and my mother's smile snagged on etiquette while my father sipped ginger ale like bourbon and refused to meet my eyes. I didn't argue. I smiled the practiced, polite kind you wear to stop a room from drawing blood and told myself, don't give them the moment when I break. I excused myself to take a client call across the room with my pulse even and walked up to the hostess stand. I gave the reservation ID, last 4 digits of the card, and my ID. The manager glanced at the tablet, hesitated the way people do when they're about to hand you a fact you're not supposed to hold, and said, 2 days ago, the cake was changed by Marissa Grant. He turned the screen. I asked if I could capture the timestamp and name nothing else. He nodded. I snapped the photo, added the confirmation number, and typed it into my notes like a ledger. Who, when, where? He added almost apologetically. The confirmation email had a CC to another Grant address. It's masked in our system. I'm sorry for the well. He didn't finish the sentence. On my way back, a boaser whispered to another not quietly enough. She even asked for the lights to hit the lettering when we bring it out. Intent, not accident. Evidence, not drama. I sat down to the soft choreography of pretend normal. The present they pushed toward me was a canary yellow paperback. Fix your personality before 45. A collective smirk passed around like bread. I turned it over as if it were fragile, filed it under another blade in my ledger, and kept my voice light enough to float. The roses at the center of the table smelled faintly of cold water and hotel lobbies. My father tapped his glass with a thumbnail as if to summon a different evening. The door opened. Rowan Lee, the only guest I'd invited for myself, slipped in. He stopped just inside the room and took in the pink frosting, the tight smiles. I didn't have to explain. I looked at Marissa, kept my voice calm. From now on, everything needs to be precise. It was barely above conversation level, but I saw it land. A half-second flinch at the corner of her eye like a light catching a blade. I sat. I didn't cut the cake I hadn't ordered. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Text from my cousin Casey Porter flashing on the lock screen. If you want to see what they've been saying tonight, say the word. I locked the phone again without opening it. Precision first. The rest would come. Back at a small boutique hotel off Main Street Arts District, the room smelled faintly of bleach and starch. White curtains breathed in the heater, quiet. My chamomile went cold while I opened the laptop and pulled up an old email thread I'd sent my mother last spring. Subject line: Thought you might be proud of this. Attached my pitch deck, all the scaffolding for a product I'd been building in Nashville the way money and timeline would braid into something useful. I clicked into the headers. 35 minutes after I hit send, Elaine Grant forwarded it to Marissa. No message, just the file. I screenshotted the full header, saved it to a folder, and wrote the first line in a list called Ledger Stolen File, number 1 pitch deck forwarded by Elaine to Marissa, plus in 35 minutes. The cursor blinked like a metronome on a bruise. I opened the Arizona Property Records portal and typed in Marissa's last name. A deed popped up for a small casita in Flagstaff, bought 5 weeks later after that forward. The down payment range matched almost eerily the very example I'd used in a retirement budget model I'd shared with my mother. A sample to show compounding, not a map for someone else's dream. I took screenshots. I didn't accuse. I wrote correlation and underlined it twice. When my brain tried to drown me in the present, it reached for older water. 16. A birthday where the house went quiet because Derek scheduled a camping trip the same weekend and half the family disappeared into the woods. 25. A Thanksgiving text from my mother. Thanksgiving is for family when I asked to bring the man I loved last year, a promotion. I ate in silence because the only response I got was, "Don't let it make you arrogant." Every memory was a technician recalibrating me smaller so there'd be more room for everyone else. I opened messages and called Avery Cho, my operations lifeline. It was late, but she answered like she always does, already typing. Audit every old share link I ever sent. Mom, I said, especially spreadsheets and models. Set log alerts on anything they could still have. Build a clean receipts folder in the secure drive subfolders for logs, headers, DMs, financial correlations, and reach out to the fortune reporter who's been following the mentorship fund. Ask about an embargo. No names, anonymized data, just the architecture of the truth Avery set on it, like a seal going down on a contract. The screen dimmed. I reopened it when Casey Porter's name lit up with a stack of images. Family group chat screenshots from the week leading up to tonight. Derek, hope he doesn't make it weird. Keep it light, fam. A heart from Marissa. A thumbs up from my mother. An aunt chiming in with a winking line. If he brings up money, call it brave. The joke is the sheath they hide the blade in. I saved every image, then stared at the word brave until it loosened into something honest permission. They had counted on mine for years. I added a note to the ledger about tone weaponized humor pattern reinforced by group chat silence used as performance of civility. I drafted a message to Avery Cho with bullet points I'd turn into evidence tags in the morning. The city outside the window hummed softly tourists and trucks. Someone laughing too loudly at dog's nails on sidewalk. I tried to sleep and learned again that you can be exhausted and fully awake at the same time. When my eyes were finally sanded, the phone on the nightstand chirped, a security alert from our shared drive monitor. 3 failed attempts to access an old link in the last 48 hours from Phoenix Metro. The file name glowed. Family Budget Projections, XLSX. I stared at it until the room steadied, wrote down the timestamp, the region tag, the short hash Avery's tool uses to identify the network, and put the phone face down. Not a scene, a line item. I got up, poured out the cold tea, and made a new cup I wouldn't drink. On the desk, the yellow self-help book someone had thought was funny sat like a borrowed mask. I slid it into the trash under the liner and opened a blank document. Title receipts under it. Who, when, where, how, Evidence first. Precision always. The night pressed its forehead to the window. I let it. Tomorrow, I'd have to be louder. Tonight, I wrote everything down. Sunday morning in Scottsdale carried the smell of rosemary potatoes and sourdough still warm from the oven. My parents' backyard had been dressed for performance. A handmade runner stretched across the reclaimed wood table. Pastel dishes arranged as if a photographer might be lurking. They saved me the last open seat wedged between my mother and Rowan Lee. Marissa was already holding court with exaggerated laughter about her podcast launch. Derek buried himself in a complaint about his boss and Harold. My father kept his eyes fixed on his plate like the food had answers. I sat down. My hands folded, my mind rehearsing the boundaries I had decided to set. Rowan leaned toward me during a lull and said quietly, "I saw your update about the mentorship fund. That's huge." I turned ready to thank him when my mother cut in with the same brittle smoothness she'd used my entire life. "Spencer has always had big ideas, but execution has been tricky." Marissa giggled into her mimosa. A few cousins smirked. The table hummed with the safe rhythm of ridicule, but Rowan didn't let it pass. He sat down, his fork voice level and sharp. "That's not funny." For the first time all weekend, the table froze. Marissa's eyes darted to mine, searching for a cue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't try to defend. I looked each of them in the eye, one by one, and spoke clearly. From this moment forward, none of my personal or financial data is to be shared in any form, verbally, digitally, indirectly. If it happens again, I will treat it as a violation, and I will act accordingly. My mother tried to laugh it off, lifting her glass like she was making a toast. "Families share that. That's what makes us strong." I answered without blinking. "Family is not immunity." Marissa shifted, seizing the silence to change the subject. "Well, maybe we should focus on positive energy. My new podcast is about healing, about how families can reconnect." I didn't take the bait. I only said evenly, "I'll present my records when it's necessary. I won't debate feelings." Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Derek's thumb slide across his phone, a flick toward the downloads folder. His jaw tightened, the kind of micro-expression you only notice when you're watching for tells. I made a mental note. Plates clattered, dishes emptied. Small talk started to seep back into the cracks. Just as the meal was winding down, my phone vibrated. I glanced under the table. Avery's alert. Unauthorized access attempt blocked. File shared. DE family budget projections. XILSX location. Scottsdale SSID hash matched the home network. I looked up slowly, eyes landing on Derek as he placed his phone face down on the table like it had nothing to say. My mother asked if I wanted more coffee. I shook my head. I waited until the last plate was cleared, then said, "We'll meet tonight in Phoenix. I have something to show you." Chairs scraped. No one asked what they knew. I pushed back my chair, stood, and stepped inside the house for air. My phone buzzed again, this time from Casey Porter, a screenshot of Marissa's LinkedIn story that had already been deleted. The caption read, "Recording tonight, Black Sheep Brother," with a microphone emoji scheduled for the same hour I'd just demanded a meeting. She wanted to strike first flood the air with her version before I laid mine down. I stared at the screen, the sour smell of cooling coffee drifting from the table behind me. If they wanted war in public, they'd get records in private first. The following evening, Marissa's apartment in downtown Phoenix glowed like a catalog spread. Candles flickered on every surface, a saxophone whispered from the speakers, and 3 bottles of red wine waited uncorked. It was the kind of ambiance meant to disguise an ambush. I walked in carrying a plain tote bag heavy with paper. Harold sat hunched in a corner chair, chewing slowly, already checked out. Elaine swept forward with a practiced smile that barely masked her nerves. Marissa greeted me as if brunch had ended in laughter instead of silence. I unzipped the tote and pulled out a thick envelope, When the plates landed on the table, I set the envelope down in the center. No one touched it. No one had to. I tore it open and began to lay the pages one by one across the tablecloth. Access logs, I said, tapping the first page. IP from Scottsdale, same time as brunch. Device IDs from Derek's laptop. Derek shifted in his chair hand, twitching toward his glass. I placed the next sheet. Forward trail. Elaine forwarded my pitch deck to Marissa 35 minutes after I sent it. The next page, a screenshot of the Flagstaff property record, purchased 5 weeks later. Down payment aligned to the exact formula I used as a sample in that retirement file. Marissa's color drained. Elaine's hand twitched toward her scarf. I leaned back, my voice calm. This isn't a courtroom, but these are my records. Family is not immunity. The silence that followed was the thickest sound in the room. Marissa broke. First, her voice pitched high. That's not true. I bought that place with my own savings. This is twisted. I slid the final page across the table. A metadata bank record showing her mortgage timestamp lined up with the date I'd marked. Her words stuttered stopped. Coincidence? I asked. She opened her mouth, closed it again. Elaine jumped in, voice brittle. We share things, Spencer. That's what families do. It's not theft, it's love. I looked straight at her. It's not love when it's without consent, and it's not sharing when only one person pays the cost. Derek slammed his palm lightly on the table, frustration spilling over. It was just data. It's not like it belonged to you. The room went cold. He realized too late what he'd admitted. I let the silence hold him. Then I gathered the papers, stacked them neatly, and slid them back into the envelope. My hands were steady, my pulse calm. I stood looking once at Marissa, once at Elaine. You wanted to laugh at me in public. Here's your mirror in private. No one moved. No one spoke. I slipped the envelope into my tote and walked to the door. Behind me, Harold coughed into his napkin. Marissa's breath caught on the edge of a protest, and Elaine murmured something that never made it into words. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I stepped into the cool Phoenix night. A push notification lit the screen. Embargo lifted. Article now live. Fortune had just published the story. The city lights shimmered across the pavement like broken glass. For the first time all weekend, I smiled without effort. Back in the Phoenix hotel, the curtains half drawn, and the hum of the city muffled behind glass. Rowan sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling his phone while I opened my laptop. The Fortune article had detonated like a charge set under dry timber. Notifications rolled in, mentions stacking faster than I could swipe away. Marissa moved quickly. Her carousel hit LinkedIn within 90 minutes. A photo of her wiping tears. Another of us as children on a lake dock. The caption bending toward martyrdom. Some people can't handle being called out, so they burn the house down. The comments filled with sympathy. Stay strong, Marissa. Family is complicated. She followed it with a podcast upload titled Healing Through Hurt, where she cast herself as the misunderstood sister, exhausted but compassionate. Derek took his shot next to cryptic X post that read, Family isn't perfect, doesn't mean it belongs in headlines. He thought he sounded wise. Instead, he sounded rehearsed. I didn't answer with sentiment. I answered with receipts. I posted screenshots of the retirement fund contract I had drafted for my parents, the annotated distribution records of the mentorship fund I'd built, and a direct message from Marissa 7 months ago. Can you cover the deposit quietly? I'll pay you back when things stabilize. The internet doesn't need flowery words when proof is plain. Within 90 minutes, female founders I had supported shared the Fortune article with commentary of their own. Not every black sheep is lost. Some saw the wolf first. The tide shifted. Sympathy drained from their stage-managed performance and pulled around the facts. Then it hit harder. A well-known investor reposted the Fortune piece with one line. Marissa's dream house, funded by Spencer's math. comments stacked under it dissecting property records I hadn't even shared yet. Fortune updated their piece in real time, adding exclusive evidence shows forwarded pitch decks and unauthorized login attempts traced to close relatives. The words glowed on the screen, cold and unarguable. Rowan leaned over my shoulder, silent as the narrative flipped. The family had wanted to paint me as bitter, vindictive, dramatic. Instead, people began calling them out as freeloaders who turned jokes into weapons. Marissa's carousel comments turned ugly strangers asking where her startup money came from, if she'd ever credit the brother she mocked. Derek deleted his ex post, but not before screenshots spread. My mother stayed silent, which was louder than anything she could have said. I closed the laptop long enough to breathe. For a moment, the room was still except for the radiator clanking like an old clock. Then my phone buzzed again. A message from Casey. "You haven't seen it all. They recorded a podcast called Black Sheep Brother already taped last week, scheduled to drop soon." I stared at the text, the hum in my chest sharpening into something colder. This wasn't improvisation. This was premeditated. They had planned my character assassination before the cake ever touched the table. Morning came gray over Phoenix. The coffee shop near Heritage Square was half empty, the air steeped in espresso and burnt sugar. I sat by the window with headphones and Rowan across from me studying my face as if he could read the track of every word. The podcast began with a soft piano loop. Then Marissa's voice deliberately hushed, soaked in false ache. "I've tried for years to reconnect with my brother, but he always chooses drama. I just wish he'd let us love him better." Her tone was calibrated vulnerability, every pause engineered. To anyone else, it might sound raw. To me, it was theater. I listened jaw tight as she spun a story where cruelty was framed as misunderstanding, where theft was rewritten as shared sacrifice. She said she carried the burden of my distance, how she longed for a family whole again. I almost laughed in the quiet cafe. Vulnerability as camouflage, sorrow as strategy. Halfway through, my phone lit up with a new message from Casey. A file. An outtake clip that hadn't made the final edit. Marissa's voice, unfiltered laughter, sharp the words cutting through any pretense. "This clip will make Spencer explode. People will eat it up." The producer chuckled with her. It was confirmation clear as ink, not reaction preparation. I sent the file to Avery with a single instruction archive and timestamp. Then I sat back, pulled the headphones down, and let the silence press in. Rowan asked softly, "You okay?" I nodded once. Better than they think. I spent the next hour drafting my own post. No trembling, no confession, no plea for sympathy, just clarity. Screenshots attached, receipts aligned, and a single caption. I won't play emotional theater. Here are the records. This is the truth. This is my last word. I scheduled it, stared at the confirmation, then pressed publish. As the post went live, a strange calm settled over me. My pulse didn't spike. My hands didn't shake. Across the cafe, a woman laughed too loud at something on her phone. Life kept moving indifferent to the storm. Rowan reached across the table, his palm resting on the wood near mine. Not pushing, just steady. I thought of the line I'd written at the end of the post. Words that had been growing in me since the pink cake hit the table. Silence isn't grace. It's permission. For years I had given that permission, and they had used it. Not anymore. I closed the laptop, packed it away, and walked out into the clear Arizona morning. The sky was pale and endless. The kind of sky that makes you feel small and free at the same time. For the first time in years, my chest didn't feel like it was carrying someone else's weight. I wasn't fighting anymore. I was recording, and records, unlike jokes, don't die when the laughter stops. 3 days later, back in my Sedona hotel room, I switched on my phone after leaving it face down for most of the morning. The screen lit up with missed calls, headlines, email notifications stacking in endless rows. What had begun as a family argument had turned into a national conversation. Marissa was first to fall. 2 of her sponsorship deals pulled out, issuing bland statements about ethical alignment and public trust. A podcast host she had been scheduled to interview with posted on her story that we don't platform voices misaligned with our values. The tone was vague, but everyone understood. Derek's turn came next. His name vanished from the Salt Lake Tech Summit lineup. A coordinator emailed him, then forwarded me their justification. We cannot risk a family scandal overshadowing industry dialogue. For years, he had walked into rooms with my ideas in his pocket and their laughter at his back. Now doors closed before he even reached the hallway. My mother Elaine fared differently. She wasn't dropped from contracts or lineups. She was abandoned socially. Friends she had lunched with for decades unfollowed her, or worse, followed me. Invitations slowed, then stopped. Her phone must have felt heavier each day. The notifications turned darker. Among the emails from investors we want to talk. Congratulations on your resilience was one unsigned. No subject line, only a single sentence. Be careful. They won't stop. Legal action is next. I stared at it, unable to tell if it was Marissa bluffing Derek threatening or an anonymous lawyer probing. Either way, it was a warning. That evening, another publication, not Fortune, but a smaller independent outlet, published their own piece. They had dug into county records and uncovered that my mother had refinanced her house using numbers uncannily similar to the projections I had once built for her. The evidence was circumstantial but damning. My chest tightened as I read the line. Pattern of dependency appears consistent. Rowan found me scrolling through X that night. He leaned over and showed me a thread and a Phoenix attorney hinting that the Grant family may pursue defamation countermeasures. It wasn't official, but it was enough to tell me where the conversation was headed. I closed the laptop and sat on the bed. The Sedona dusk seeping through the curtains. They wanted to scare me into silence with lawsuits, but lawsuits opened doors to discovery, and discovery would drag every email, every log, every receipt into daylight. That was what they feared more than me. In my calendar, I booked a one-way ticket back to Nashville. Under notes, I typed start of a new chapter. The cursor blinked at me like a promise. 10 days after the Fortune article went live, I was back in Nashville. The sun was soft, a steady autumn light washing over the city. Outside the convention center, banners flapped. Nashville Women in Tech 2026. I was the keynote speaker. An irony not lost on me. My family had called me dramatic, impractical, a disappointment. Now I stood at the podium as the room filled with voices eager to listen. Backstage, I closed my eyes and let memory run its reel. The pink cake with its cruel lettering, the group chat jokes, the forwarded emails, and the access logs, the silence of my father, the brittle laughter of my mother. Every step, every receipt had brought me here. When the stage manager waved me forward, I walked to the mic. The room hushed. I took a breath and began. Silence is not grace. It's permission. For too long I stayed silent, and that silence gave them permission to hurt me. It gave them permission to rewrite me as a joke. My voice didn't tremble. It carried. You don't need to be believed to have value. You don't need to be loved to know you're worthy. A pause. The kind that holds the weight of years. Then applause broke like a wave rising until the sound was physical. People stood clapping, some with tears in their eyes. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A message from Casey. They've stopped responding. The family chat is dead. They've all gone silent. I didn't feel victorious. I felt lighter. Relief replaced rage the way dawn replaces night. I hadn't come for apologies. They would have been hollow anyway. What I wanted was severance. And now the cord was cut. As the event wound down, I stepped off stage, heart still steady. A woman I had never met approached me in the hallway. Her voice was low urgent. Because of your story, I left my house last night. I didn't know how to walk away until I heard you. Thank you. She gripped my hand, then slipped into the crowd. The meaning hit harder than any applause. My story wasn't about exposing them anymore. It was about freeing myself and maybe giving someone else the courage to do the same. Later, back at my apartment, I slid a printed copy of the Fortune article and a photo from the keynote into a drawer. Not trophies, not weapons, just markers of survival, symbols of the truth I had chosen to live. Outside, Nashville's sky stretched clean and blue. I stood in the lobby, exhaled, and whispered what I had known since the cake hit the table. Forgiveness was never the goal. Freedom was. Then I walked outside into the light unburdened. Nashville nights carry a different kind of silence. It was late. The hum of traffic softened by distance. The city lights spread out like a field of lanterns beyond my balcony. I sat at my desk with the laptop open, the folder glowing on the screen. Final receipts. Every click of the trackpad sounded like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. Rowan had stopped by earlier, quiet but steady, and before he left, he slid his phone across the table. A text from my mother had come through him. Not me. We're still your family. You misunderstood everything. Come home. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what had been done, only the same old reflex to rewrite the story. So I doubt myself. I handed the phone back, thanked him, and closed the door. For years, I would have tried to argue with that message to prove with words that I hadn't misunderstood, that I was more than the label they stamped on me. Tonight, I didn't argue. Tonight, I finished. I opened the folder and chose the pieces carefully, like laying out evidence for a museum exhibit no one could vandalize. Email headers that traced my pitch deck from my inbox to Marissa. IP logs from the Scottsdale router the morning of brunch. Screenshots of the family group chat with my mother's silent thumbs up as the knife turned. The outtake of Marissa laughing with her producer, bragging that her podcast clip would make me explode. One by one, I compressed the files, labeled them, and sent them to a secure archive. One copy to Fortune, another to my attorney. One more locked in an offline drive. I slid into the drawer beside a printed copy of the Fortune article and the photograph of me on stage in Nashville. No longer weapons, now they were protection guard rails against revision. Minutes later, an email came back from the Fortune editor. We've prepared legal support should your family attempt to countersue. You won't be alone in this. I read it twice, feeling something loosen in my chest. For so long, I had assumed I was the solitary voice in a room that wanted me quiet, but the proof had built its own allies. Then another message arrived, this time from an investment fund I had once pitched to but never secured. We've been following your story. We'd like to discuss partnership. Sometimes resilience is the best credential. I sat back in my chair. What began as humiliation at a dinner table had reshaped itself into opportunity. I whispered aloud the line that had been circling me for weeks. Silence isn't peace. It's permission. Tonight, I revoked it. I closed the laptop, slid the drive into the drawer, and looked out at the Nashville skyline. Tomorrow would not be another day for them to define me. That power was finished. 3 weeks later, Nashville was washed in soft rain. I sat by my window with a mug cooling in my hands, watching the droplets stitched silver threads down the glass. The city moved as it always did. People hurrying with umbrellas, buses sighing at stops, traffic lights blinking their endless rhythm. Life was ordinary again, but I was not. My inbox was full, not with contracts or pitches, but with messages from strangers. One in particular made me pause. Your story gave me the courage to leave a toxic house. I packed my bags last night. Thank you for reminding me that survival isn't selfish. I filed it into a folder I'd named Healing, proof that pain when spoken could become permission for someone else to walk free. I thought back over the road here. The pink cake, the yellow book, the brunch in Scottsdale, the Phoenix dinner table, Marissa's podcast, the Fortune publication, the keynote in Nashville. Each moment had felt like a trap when I lived it. Together, they were the ladder I climbed out on. I didn't need their approval to make it valid. The record was enough. I pulled open the drawer at my desk. Inside were the things I'd chosen to keep. The birthday card with its empty signatures, the Fortune article in print, the photo of me behind the podium. I placed them back neatly, not as reminders of wounds, but as markers of escape. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother again. "We love you, Spencer." The words sat on the screen like paper flowers. Pretty, but without life. I placed the phone face down. Love is not a sentence typed in regret. Love is action. Love is boundaries respected. For the first time in years, I smiled without bitterness. It wasn't a mask. It was real. I understood fully now that forgiveness was never the point. I had never needed their apology. What I had wanted all along was freedom, and freedom is what I had finally taken. I stood, pulled on my jacket, and stepped outside. The rain was steady but not cold, the kind that cleanses instead of punishes. People passed me on the sidewalk, each carrying their own unseen story. I drew in a long breath and let it out. The weight was gone. Forgiveness was never the goal, I said quietly to myself. Freedom was, and now it's mine. And with that, I walked into the city unburdened, unafraid, finally whole. Sometimes, when I look back, I realize my story was never just about betrayal at a dinner table or a family feud that spun out of control. It was about years of being silenced, minimized, laughed at, and told to shrink so others could feel taller. That pink cake with its cruel message was only the spark, but the fire had been smoldering for decades. And when I finally decided to gather the receipts to speak with precision instead of rage, I understood something life-changing. The truth doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs the courage to be shown. I didn't win because they lost. I didn't expose them for the sake of humiliation. I chose to put everything on record because I refused to let lies become my biography. And in doing so, I learned that silence isn't a shield. It isn't kindness. It isn't grace. Silence is permission. And when you take that permission back, you set yourself free. Maybe you've been where I was treated as the disappointment, the outcast, the black sheep. Maybe you've been laughed at for standing your ground, told you were too dramatic when you were only being honest. If so, let my story remind you, you are not defined by the people who benefit from your silence. You are defined by your decision to speak, to stand, to walk away if you must. Freedom is not handed to you. It's claimed. And now, I want to ask something of you. If my story resonated, if even one part of it touched your own scars or gave you strength, let me know you're here. Leave a simple hi in the comments or share where you're listening from. I can't see your faces, but your presence matters. It turns this from a monologue into a community. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It's more than a button. It's a way to say these stories matter. That telling the truth matters. That people like us, people who have been dismissed, silenced, underestimated, deserve to be heard. I carried this weight for too long. Now it's lighter because I've let it out. And maybe, just maybe, by sharing it, I've helped lift some weight off you too. Thank you for being here, for listening, for proving that silence doesn't have the last word. Freedom does.